back to Top 25 Voter Pod with a couple of top 25 basketball voters here. We've got Chad Conine, we've got John Werner. Guys, welcome back. Good to see y'all.
Yeah, it should be noted that we're doing Voter Pod on Inauguration Day. Not that there's anything significant about that, but you know.
Right.
All votes count, right?
Right. And yep.
All votes count. That's right.
I don't know why I steered us toward politics. That was a bad move.
That was a bad move. Let's dodge that. But we are trying to embrace the concept of unity here on the podcast. We might lose
what?
Unity.
Oh, I thought you said nudity.
Gosh, we are really off the rails already. And this may take us away from unity because we're going to talk a little bit about the Baylor men's basketball team who beat Chad's Texas Tech Red Raiders, and then of course on Big Monday beat Kansas. So guys, if Baylor goes on and beats Oklahoma State this weekend on the road, the fighting Cade Cunninghams, does that make Baylor number one?
I think they have a real good argument if they do beat Oklahoma State. Coming off wins over Tech and Kansas, 2 top 25 wins. And Gonzaga's best games are behind them now. Of course, they played some really good teams, beat Kansas, West Virginia, Illinois, beat really good teams. But the teams they have coming up nobody's getting even votes in the top 25 in the West Coast Conference. So I think Baylor's got a decent shot. I don't think they'll get over the hump yet because Gonzaga had 62 out of 64 first place votes in the last poll. So it'll be hard, but they'll definitely get a lot more.
Chad?
Well, I think Baylor is the hottest team in the country right now. I mean, in terms of beating good teams and playing and looking unstoppable. Now, obviously, the goal of college basketball is not to be unstoppable on January the 20th, but you got to give them credit for being really hot. Also, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the game Knockout.
Yeah, love
yeah.
Knockout.
Yeah, you know what they call it now? If you play knockout from 3-point range,
what's that?
Baylor basketball practice.
Chad was thinking that they were hitting some knockout type shots against the Red.
Well, and I'm making fun of them a little bit because they do shoot a lot of. In fact, they haven't shot more than anybody else in the Big 12, but they're shooting 42% right now. And hey, if they shoot 42% for the next 2 months from 3-point range, they're probably going to win the national championship.
Yeah.
So, but one thing I wrote in my column the other day was when they're hitting threes like that, you're not going to beat them, and just exactly what Chad just said. So,
but I am making fun of them, but then I have to make fun of myself a little bit, and I'll bring up this golf book reference or a golf reference, a book called The Match, which is probably the best golf book that I've ever read. But they're talking about this one match between a guy named Frank Stranahan and another guy named Harvey Ward, and Frank Stranahan was kind of this he was like the best amateur in the country, and they were playing this match and he was getting really mad. He was also kind of a guy they made fun of a lot. And he got real mad at Harvey Ward because he was sinking everything. And he said, if you couldn't putt, you wouldn't even be in the game,
Yeah.
Which is huge. I mean, it's just a ridiculous thing to say because, I mean, that's the main part of golf, right, is to make putts. So anyway, so
make
credit
is putts. Yeah. So John mentioned 62 out of 64 voters are going Gonzaga. So I don't see Baylor getting number one anytime soon. That said, the Big 12 is certainly a stronger conference than what is Gonzaga in?
West Coast
Conference. That's what I was going to say. That's what I had.
Yeah.
So I think Baylor has a chance to move up by the season's end,
for sure.
As they get through maybe the second round of the Big 12, but that also necessitates them continuing to win, and that won't be easy either.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think if Gonzaga, this goes without saying, but if Gonzaga were to stumble and lose, then that certainly opens the door for Baylor. So let's move on to women's basketball and the Lady Bears. And of course, Kim Mulkey's team lost their long 61 game home winning streak. Iowa State upset them last Saturday. And after the game, Kim, generated some headlines with some comments that she made about saying that college basketball is still being played during the pandemic because of the almighty dollar and, the almighty dollar that the NCAA men's basketball tournament generates. So my question to you guys is, do you think it's still worth playing, even, as we play out in a pandemic and there's pauses and delays and postponements?
Well, let me contextualize that comment because probably Stephen Hawkins from the AP did put it in context and why she said that. But one of the reporters that was on there asked her how she felt about playing in these circumstances and in this situation, and it was after. It was after she had answered questions about Iowa State and about how they played and about everything surrounding it. And then she just said, do you want my honest answer or do you want the PC answer? And no reporter is ever going to say, well, just give us the PC answer and we'll just go right on down the road, So that's kind of why she launched into that. And I didn't take it so much as should we be playing? It was more like, well, they're going to get through the NCAA men's tournament because they need the revenue from the NCAA men's tournament. Now, I love college basketball, always have. I was really looking forward to this season for a long time. It's been disappointing that it hasn't really been a complete season. It has had interruptions. But I don't think anybody wants to not do it, and I kind of compare it to, you're playing around, going back to golf, you can see, tell where my head's at, but going back to golf, sometimes you go out there and play and you have a rain delay in the middle of the round, or you make a quadruple bogey and break a club, or, the drink girl doesn't come around enough with the drink cart, but
Chad, do you break many clubs?
Quit playing, you finish out the round, and it's still you're still out there playing golf and it's still fun, but it may so it's not perfect circumstances, and this college basketball season is a long way from ideal circumstances, but it's still fun. I mean, I heard the atmosphere out there at the Farrell Center the other night was pretty good, and probably not that different from a normal non-Kansas home game for them.
Yeah, I definitely think they should be playing. The pauses are frustrating. I think Kim probably said that a little bit out of frustration because they haven't been able to play for a while. They hadn't even been able to practice. But yeah, it's just a strange year. And, like football, if you can just get some games in now and then, I think it's great for everybody. I think, the players obviously want to play, the fans want to be there. But yeah, can you imagine how depressing it would be right now if they weren't playing? Especially like for the players. That would just be awful to me. And of course, it gives us something to do too.
Chad's throwing out golf analogies. I'm going to throw out a church analogy.
Oh yeah,
where my head is at.
What's the difference?
Well, you don't break clubs in church.
So
speak for yourself.
If you are attending church in person, it looks a lot different than it used to. You have, at least at my church, we have, pew, then no pew, then pew, and where you can sit and one family in the bathroom at a time. And obviously we're not shaking hands and hugging and doing all that kind of thing. And I go back to something that I think Chad said a lot during football season, which was it's better than nothing. If you think back to when we were just doing virtual church, that left a lot to be desired. And so, yeah, I agree that sports during a pandemic. It's not what we're used to, and it's not what we really love. I mean, it's not the perfect, situation, but it is better than nothing, and to me, it's absolutely worth playing. And I think most of these organizations, from the NCAA to the NBA to the Major League Baseball, have done a pretty good job of navigating how to get through it. I mean, you're going to have some delays and some postponements, but that's inevitable.
To have some level of grace toward the NCAA, which isn't something that I have very often. I've bashed them more often than not. But I mean, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NFL, they've got 32 teams in most cases to legislate, to administrate, and all of that stuff. And I mean, NCAA is so sprawling, and maybe that's a big part of all of its problems. That the time it takes to enforce its rules. I mean, Division I basketball, there's 300 something schools, right?
Right.
And so then you got 3 divisions. And so, I mean, and they all have to follow rules. I mean, just because somebody's Division II or Division III doesn't mean they don't have to follow some rules, so, and to, the testing thing is the biggest thing to me, where I think they had to do it to kind of appease certain groups about whether or not they played. But I mean, high school football, and Kim brought up high school football the other day. She asked, did they do testing in high school football? And they didn't, and I don't think there was any difference between the level of stoppages in high school football, except for there were fewer. But in terms of breakouts that were associated with this team or that team, but they didn't test. But I feel like the NCAA and pro sports, they had to test as a sort of PC measure to appease certain groups about whether or not they played. And on the government level, the federal government level, they never did come up with any sort of law that said you can't sue somebody if you get COVID somewhere, and that probably kept a lot of things from happening that could have happened in a different way, like fans at Lambeau Field,
Right. And not to get too deep in the weeds on this subject, but if you think about us a year ago in this same, going through last season, and COVID wasn't even on our radar. And here we are a year later, and having all these discussions about how do we navigate it. Well, I think everyone's trying to navigate it about as best as you can. This is unprecedented territory.
I remember interviewing Kalani Brown about this time a year ago, and she was home from her Chinese professional team because, COVID had become a major issue there. And so they weren't going back or whatever until they got that sorted out. And, you feel like you're just such a dupe at this point, being, oh, that's interesting that they have that problem. Well, whatever, and 6 weeks later, it's like, yeah, everything's done.
Right. Yeah. It was a different time, a simpler age, as I said in my column the other day. So back to basketball. In the men's poll, several of the blue bloods in college basketball, including Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Louisville, are not in the top 25. Do you guys feel like this is pandemic related, or is it just that there's more parity across men's basketball?
Yeah, I think it's both. Kentucky, to me, they're going to be erratic a lot of years. I mean, they usually make the tournament, but they've got new guys in every year, so they've got to rebuild that chemistry. And this year, they haven't had much chemistry at all. They're 4-8, and they lost 6 straight games coming into the SEC. So, you probably saw Calipari complain that he's the one to blame for this because of the tough schedule. But the thing is, they play a pretty tough schedule every year. I just don't think they've got the team this year, the chemistry. And I think probably the pandemic has had something to do with that. Irregular practices, postponed games, that kind of thing. And this is another thing I looked up. Duke and North Carolina, this is the first time since '82 that at least one of those teams haven't been in the poll.
It's crazy.
So, yeah. And Duke has had more COVID problems than North Carolina. North Carolina's 8-5. Duke is 5-4. They went about a month without playing at one point. And, they just lost to Pittsburgh. So I think they're just kind of an average team this year. And, the pandemic might have something to do with that. But yeah, Louisville's a good team. They're 9-3. I think they were 26th this week. So they're a good team. I think they'll probably be back in the poll pretty soon. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of both.
Well, you look at factors. North Carolina isn't as much of a one and done program as, say, like Duke and Kentucky, and maybe Louisville. Louisville might be a little bit in the middle, but when you had guys making decisions whether or not to come back for another year, a year ago, whether or not to play a college season, that might have impacted whether or not guys come back. It's interesting in the last 3 seasons since Zaire Smith left early from Texas Tech after his sophomore year in 2018. Texas Tech has had 2 guys leave early. I mean, 3 guys leave early. Zaire Smith, and then Jarrett Culver, and then Jamias Ramsey after his freshman year last year. But also another huge factor for Texas Tech, and not comparing Texas Tech to Duke, but I mean, here's just one angle. Davide Moretti would have been a senior this year, right? Not going to the NBA, but because of the uncertain nature of this college basketball season, Davide Moretti went home to Italy during the shutdown last year and was like, you know what? Probably just easier to play pro ball here and start making a living, And, do you think, I think maybe some guys went to the G League. In fact, there was one guy, Jonathan Kuminga, that opted to go to the G League instead of going, picking between some of the top programs in the country this year. And so, you had probably decisions like that impacted those schools. And then obviously, I mean, when you're dealing with a brand new crop of guys every year, you need to beat up on some Winthrops of the world, to get your legs under you probably.
I think the pandemic, though, has actually helped Baylor. I think there's probably a pretty good chance Jared Butler would have been gone, if they had, if he could have worked out for teams and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's probably just affected teams different ways, whether they came back or left.
It is weird, though, to look in that top 25 and not see a Duke or a North Carolina or a Kentucky. I mean, that 82 stat that you mentioned, John, that's pretty mind blowing. Chad and I were just little kids. You were what, in your 10th year at the Trib in 82?
Yeah, I was already a haggard veteran.
All right, moving on. So
actually, that was my first year at the Trib.
Yeah, 82. That was a fun year. North Carolina was really good in 82. They won the national title. Michael Jordan. So guys, as mentioned, you are both top 25 voters. So when you're looking at like teams 26 through, I don't know, 29, or, those teams are just sort of on the fringe of making the poll. And, maybe each week, as you're sort of putting together your poll, you have a few of those teams at the end of the poll that you're kind of looking at. What is it that sort of propels that team that may be 27 one week into the poll the next?
Well, I had a very relevant to all of our topics decision to make this week on that. And as I was doing my poll on Sunday night, I just thought, man, I have a lot more sympathy for these voters when I'm putting together a poll like this, because there was a lot of movement in the women's poll. Stanford and Baylor both lost. A lot of 6 through 16 teams lost the game, or they would beat one top 25 and lose to another, that type of situation. And so then it came down to, I kicked one team out, and I had to bring one team in. And so I looked at Matter of fact, I got it around here somewhere. The list of schools that I made. Well, here it is. So here's like sort of, I don't know how well you can see it, but there's like my cheat sheet or my scratch. Huh?
You have to bring it closer.
Wait a minute. Is it like?
Yeah.
Anyway,
you
probably can't read it.
I mean, it's quite as bad as John's handwriting.
Well, it's written in my. Not only is it written in my handwriting, it's written in like very intricate like code that only I can decipher. But I just look at it here. I evaluated Iowa State, Nebraska, Syracuse, Gonzaga, and DePaul. None of which I had in the top 25. Now, Syracuse, Gonzaga, and DePaul are on other people's ballots because they're in the top 25. But you know, and when it came right down to it, Iowa State has won 6 out of 7, including a top 10 win. And to me, that boosted them into the poll. Now, I wasn't the only one who thought that because I voted them. I might have voted them 24 actually, and then they were in the poll at 24. So so they got in there, but that was because, you know, that old who's the hottest team right now. And the NCAA basketball tournament, you know, at times they've said that they look at the last 10 games and they want to get, you know, the teams that are playing the best basketball right then, you know, in the tournament. So that was, you know, winning 6 out of 7 was a determining factor for me this week. Now, normally it would be like, oh, this team's won 12 games, but no top 25 wins, or this team's won 10 games, but they've beaten 2 top 25 teams. So that's a big thing to me. In fact, I left Gonzaga out because Gonzaga has a really good record. They're 12-2, but they haven't beaten the top 25 team, and they lost to South Dakota State. And so I've got South Dakota State in my poll.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think teams from power conferences usually have a better chance if they're sitting right outside the top 25, because if they beat a top 25 team, like say a Big 10 team or a Big 12 team, there's a decent chance, you know, they might get in, especially if they beat 2 top 25 teams in 1 week. Now, say a team from a lesser known conference, somebody like St. Louis, they're number 25 this week. They're likely not going to beat a top 25 team because there's not a top 25 team in their league. So with them, it's almost like they've got to put a string together, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 wins, something like that. And to me, that's a lot harder to get into the poll when you're in that position, because, you know, you're going to notice teams that upset somebody, especially like you said, Chad, like a top 25 team. So yeah, to me, it's either like, you know, you get attention by upsetting a top 25 team, or you have a really long winning streak.
Good thoughts, good breakdown there. And next week we're gonna have a special guest star. I didn't tell you all this. It's gonna be Tom Hanks, and we're gonna crack Chad's code there and figure out what all his little secret symbols mean.
Yeah, angels and demons too.
Good stuff. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And we'll see you viewers next week.